fell in love. They had one child, and they were together until the end, madly in love their whole life. Brigitta has 2 children, and she has a degree from Avery College in business. She has a business degree. She founded her business, Toruño Translations, 14 years ago, and she is going to be our speaker as soon as she gets all mic'd up. While she's speaking, we have a beautiful surprise for you, and that is that we are going to have a flamenco dancer who is going to interpret her speech today with dance. I'm going to read you the dancer's bio. Amanda Gill is founder and director of DC Casaneros Dance Company, a professional Cuban salsa dance company and non-profit organization based in Washington, D.C. She has been choreographing, teaching, and performing salsa, along with Afro-Cuban dance and modern dance for the past 10 years. Amanda is a registered dance movement therapist and designs workshops using social dance for stress reduction and team building. So please welcome Brigitta and Amanda.
The flamenco, the dance of Spain, one of the countries of my ancestors. This is my maternal grandfather's line, and he lived in Ecuador.
I'm not sure we can hear you.
He lived in Ecuador, and he was a brilliant man. He was a college biology professor. He wrote textbooks and even poetry books. He was known for being an extremely polite man, and he never touched a drop of alcohol. But he was a monster. He would beat my beautiful abuelita, my grandmother, my being of light. The abuelita was a tiny lady, maybe not even 4'5". But what she lacked in height, she made up for in her spirit, because she loved life, she loved music, and she loved God. When she walked down the street, she would want to say hello to everybody and flash her beautiful smile. But when they got home, the monster would beat her for that. He would slap her in the face, punch her in the stomach, push her to the ground, and drag her by the hair, all in front of their 3 children. Mi madre was the oldest. A kind neighbor decided to tell mi abuelita's family what was happening. They had no idea. Her father and brothers rushed from another town to rescue them. But mi madre was held by her father for 6 months. She was only 5 years old. She never fully recovered. Remember, dance through la vida. The pasillo, the dance of Ecuador, mi madre's country. The family was reunited in the small town of Ambato, far from the monster. The small family unit went to live with my abuelita's parents. They were a family of means, but the small family unit was not. They were poor. They didn't have a father. They were saddened and in despair over what had just happened. But mi abuelita thought the only thing I can pass on to my children is my love of music. Music became their salvation. Mi madre learned how to play the piano, the guitar, the accordion, the harp, the organ. She composed music. To her poetry, she composed it to her mother's poetry, and even to her father's poetry. And this is an example of the words of a song that mi abuelita and my mother wrote together. Si presente te he querido, ausente te quiero más, porque di la palabra de no olvidarte jamás. Ya ni lágrimas tengo, fiel corazón pudiera todo lo que tengo que hablar, pero es mejor callar. And the translation: if I loved you in your presence, I love you more in your absence. I swore never to forget you. I don't have any tears left. If my faithful heart could only speak, but it's better to stay silent. Remember, dance through la vida. The tango, the dance of Argentina, mi padre's country. Or the Russian folk dance, because that is where my maternal grandparents were from. But we'll save that for another time. Mi padre grew up poor, but in a very loving family. He had 3 sisters, and as the only brother, he was pretty spoiled. At 18, he decided to enlist in the army. And when he got out, he realized he was lost. He didn't have a trade. So he decided that he was going to make a go of it in the United States. So he left his Buenos Aires querido, his family, his muchachos de la esquina, his good buddies from his neighborhood, who hailed from Italy, Poland, Russia, and where he learned some wonderful cooking skills. At the age of 45, my extremely kind, wonderful father developed diabetes, and he suffered terribly the last few years of his life. When he was 60 years old, he had to have a 6-way bypass, and then he suffered a major stroke. I clearly remember being in his ICU room. He was completely paralyzed, and he had machines coming out of all parts of his body just to keep him alive. The doctors looked at me, his only child, and said, "Do you want us to take him off of the ventilator?" I looked at my father. He was watching me with his beautiful blue eyes. I couldn't allow it. I said no. My father couldn't speak or swallow the last 6 years of his life. I watched as he was slowly and painfully taken from me. I still remember when I was a little girl, I would watch him on Sunday mornings, sitting in the living room, listening to his tango music. He was a good tango dancer, not a ballroom dancer, but he did it his way. And he would say, "I forgot my zapatos milongueros, my dancing shoes, in Argentina." Especially when my mother would say, "You are not a good dancer or a good provider. Remember, dance through la vida." Salsa, a lively Latin music. The lyrics range from sorrowful to romantic, but the rhythm is pure caliente. So of course it was during this time that I met my husband. And what was the first thing that he says to me? "You would make a great tour guide while I'm here on vacation from law school in Nicaragua." This was familiar territory for me. He wanted me to be his interpreter. I was 17 years old when I got married, and we have been happily married for 32 years now. Wow. Sometimes I think that he still thinks he's on vacation. My husband was a marathon runner, and 6 years ago the doctors told him, "You have got to stop running because of the severe arthritis in his knees. And this was devastating to him. He had run for almost 40 years of his life. So suddenly this past spring I decided I think I want to start running, and I trained for a 5K. And he said, hey, do you mind if I run alongside you? I said, of course. So he had a light backpack on, and he was holding my asthma inhaler in his hand, just in case he had to stop running because of the pain, and he would hand it to me. Well, he ran the entire 5K with me, shoulder to shoulder, holding on to my asthma inhaler. He has been a rock of support for me for 32 years. Modern dance, an American dance, and this brings my wonderful children to mind. Modern dance is an amalgamy of dance forms, and that's what my children are. They are a mix of many different immigrant backgrounds, and just like I have been doing, they are learning to dance through life. My daughter, literally, she has degrees in dance and in Spanish, and a master's degree in dance therapy. And now she's an entrepreneur. And my son has a degree in international relations, and he uses Spanish in his job. They are both now married and learning to dance through la vida with their partners. So you may notice that there's a piece missing here, and that's my story. I tend to put myself last, and as my family and good friends know, that's something that I'm working on. Learning how to put myself first so that I can then give back more to my loved ones and to my community. I am on a lifetime journey of self-awareness. So you may notice that at the beginning I was talking to you about my monster grandfather. Well, my madre had many wonderful traits, but she also had some of my grandfather's worst traits. And she took them out on me, her only child. Mi abuelita was my main nurturer and caregiver. She would go to church very early every morning when I was a baby so that she could get back to feed me, change me, be with me. Mi madre really didn't know how to nurture. Mi madre would tell the story that one morning I started crying before mi abuelita got back from church. So she decided to get up to try to change my cloth diaper. And she put in the diaper pin, and I started crying hysterically. And the more that I cried, the more frustrated and angry that she got. I was lucky that mi abuelita came in at that moment to this scene and realized that mi madre had been pushing the pin into my skin. Mi madre would laugh when she told the story. There are many other stories, such as this one. Stories of a mother that was filled with rage. I always felt like I had to walk on eggshells so that I wouldn't set off her temper. I remember my childhood room. My mother had put high shelves up on all of the walls, and she had filled them with beautiful dolls. Dolls that I was not allowed to play with, or I would get punished. It was during times like these that I ran to las faldas de mi abuelita, to my grandmother's lap, or I would hide under her skirt. She was my protector. She was my guardian angel. And then in a very calm voice, she would say to mi madre, ¿Qué pasa, hija? Why are you trying to hurt your daughter? You need to ask God for strength during these moments. And then she would put a guitar in my mother's hands, and she would become a gentle soul. I learned compassion and forgiveness and spirituality from mi abuelita. Her inner strength became my inner strength. Her courage was my courage. She was my salvation. Mi madre y mi padre were also my salvation. They were also God's love. Mi madre passed away 7 years ago of the flu, and I spent her last 72 hours with her by her bedside. She was in a coma, and I didn't want to look away for a moment because I thought I would miss her last breath. I decided to bring hundreds of my mother's typewritten musical songs with me. And I started singing them to her one by one. These were songs that she had composed, her favorite Latin American songs and church songs. Her church choir friends came and sang by the bedside. It sounded like a choir of angels. And then my mother, the nurses in my family said to me, "You have got to rest. Just lay down for a moment." I did. And in that moment, my mother took her last breath in front of my husband. Maybe she wanted to spare me that. Or maybe she wanted me to stop singing. I have worked hard to break the cycle of rage in my family. I tried my best, and I knew what not to do. My children got to play with all of their toys. And I just feel so fortunate that I have my children, my family, and I wanted to say a quote. Risha Badami, in her Sterling Women speech, she said, "My children are a gift from God. They were given to me to help me heal." And that's exactly how I feel. Her words shook me to the core. And thank you, Risha. Please tell. As people, as business owners, we all have obstacles to overcome. When things get difficult, turn on the music. And remember that it doesn't matter where we started or where we've been. The important thing is to remember to dance through life. And as one of my mentors, Wanda Alexander, put in her newsletter, it's not about the storms, it's learning how to dance in the rain. And please help me celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. Can you please come up on stage or dance by your chairs to celebrate?
I'm not going anywhere, Brigitta. We would like to open it up for questions. So if anyone has a question, please let us know.